Hi, everybody. We're back this afternoon for our third day, our afternoon of wonderful publisher insider blogs and posts and panels. And I have a really special guest today. I'm so thrilled. In fact, I'm standing up. I wore my shirt because Melissa Carrigee of Brother Mockingbird published my book edited by Susan Fishman. And I'm moving really close because I want you guys to see. On my shoulder is my new little raven pin from Sarah Stamey, who will be included in our swag for if anybody buys her book from my website. You'll get a pin as long as they last. And I want to show our book, and I know Betty has hers with her, but they did a fabulous job on our, let's see, was there 69 stories in this book, poems, essays, all kinds of different things in this book from our authors, with 4 blurbs from New York Times bestselling authors. So buy this book for Brother Mockingbird. I'm going to have Melissa give information on the best ways to get that. And she is here today. I met her through Johnny Bernhard. And thank you, Johnny, for that introduction. And she actually had a booth at Girlfriend Weekend. And I am really thrilled that she published the book because I love people that are passionate about reading. And I want you to give the backstory, Melissa Carrigee, and I want you also then to introduce your guest, Rebecca Copeland, and tell her story. So I'm turning it over to you. Thank you.
Okay. Do you want me to give the backstory of Brother Mockingbird, or how we?
Yeah, I do. Okay. I think people need to know the story.
Well, Brother Mockingbird, well, first of all, I wanted to say thanks to Kathy and Mandy and everybody behind the scenes. It's been really fun. So thank you all. Brother Mockingbird came about from friends being in this industry. We call ourselves the Mississippi Mafia, literary sisters. We were talking one day. We both writers and saw the miscommunications, the lack of communications between writers, publishers, distribution centers, marketers, book cover designers. Like, wouldn't it be good to start your own publishing house and be that publishing house that you want to be a part of? So I'm like, well, hey, what's your favorite book? Okay. So she said, The Brothers Karamazov.
Oh, yeah.
I said that right. And then mine is To Kill a Mockingbird. So therefore, Brother Mockingbird was born, and we just opened up another small imprint this year for specific 80s books, anything about or in the awesome 80s. It's called Small Town Girl Publishing. So we are growing. Oh. And so we're just really proud of the authors that we have and their books. And we try to be the stepping stone of them moving up in the world and educating them on the industry and what it takes, because it's not only writing a good book, but you really need a good understanding of what goes on behind the book. I think it makes you a better author, especially when you're having to get out there and sell the book, because it's just, that's what you have to do nowadays. Mm-hmm. So Rebecca came to us, I read her query and I fell in love with the book. I had to have the book. So enough about Brother Mockingbird. I want to tell you a little bit about Rebecca. I'm sorry, I have to read. Rebecca Copeland is a writer of fiction and literary criticism and a translator of Japanese literature. Her stories travel between Japan and the American South and touch on questions of identity, belonging, and self-discovery. The Kimono Tattoo, her debut work, takes readers on a journey into Kyoto's intricate world of kimono design and into a mystery that interweaves family dynamics, loss, and reconciliation. Rebecca is also has translated some books, and I am not going to butcher this book's name and the author's name, so I'll let her tell you about that. But I'd like to introduce Rebecca Copeland and let her tell us a little bit about the Kimono Tattoo.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Melissa, and thank all of you for joining. I look forward to any questions you may have, and certainly I'm just so honored to be included in this distinguished group. Um, I, I'm a professor of Japanese literature, and I've written academic works, of course, to survive in my profession. But I thought that wouldn't it be wonderful to write a novel set in Japan that might attract a different kind of reader? Not everybody's going to want to read my academic books, I realize, and not everybody's going to sit in my class. But I love Japan, and I really wanted to try to open another doorway for readers to access Japan in a way that might be less intimidating than traveling there directly. And so that's sort of what led me to want to write the Kimono Tattoo. I was inspired by writers like Sujata Massey, who has a whole series of mystery fiction set in Japan. And I thought perhaps I could do something like that. So little did I know it was going to take nearly 10 years, and the learning curve was really steep. But having worked with people like Melissa and Johnny Bernhard, it really helped ease the way into publication.
And that's what we like to hear.
Yeah. Get your insurance card, let me have it. I'm gonna fill out that thing for you.
Was that somebody for me?
No, I
Okay.
think somebody talking.
Okay.
Okay.
So I'm going to ask Rebecca a few questions. We have been talking, and what you will find with the Kimono Tattoo is, just like the cover says, it is layer upon layer upon layer. So even having read the book multiple times, being the publisher, as we talked yesterday about it, I still unraveled some mysteries that I didn't realize were there. I'm like, oh, why didn't I see that before? So I really hope y'all read this book. It is a really great book. One of the most magical things about the Kimono Tattoo I found was how Rebecca made Kyoto a character in her story. And you really feel like you are there. I've never been to Kyoto. I've hardly been out of the South, but I really felt after reading this book that I was there and I've experienced Kyoto. So I wanted to know what makes the city so magical to you, Rebecca, that you would want to write about it and make it a central part of the book.
Okay, yeah. Most people who go to Japan start in Tokyo, and I spent a lot of time in Tokyo, and had a career there for a number of years, and didn't really have much occasion to go to Kyoto. It was sort of the old capital, and I felt like, that's past, and Tokyo is where the current is, where the present and the future lie. But 1 year I had the opportunity to teach American students in Kyoto, and had to adjust to this new city kind of alongside my students. And it's just such a beautiful city. So much of Japan was destroyed in World War II. Of course, we all know about the atomic bombs, but Tokyo, Nagoya, all the major cities were bombed and really devastated and had to rebuild. But Kyoto was spared and was not subject to the bombings. So much of Japanese history is still visible in Kyoto, and that kind of goes to this sense of sedimentation, of layering. When you live in Kyoto, you're constantly aware of something that happened 700 years ago, or something that happened 500 years ago. So there's this sort of sense of history in Kyoto that I find magical. And also there's just so many of the traditional arts that are still practiced in Kyoto. And since I'm interested in literature, that's what really appealed to me about the city.
Well, why don't we actually tell them a little bit about the Kimono Tattoo, and then I want you to read a little bit from it.
Okay, well, the story revolves around an American named Ruth Bennett, who grew up in Japan because her parents were missionaries in Kyoto. And she goes back to the United States to try to find her way, her identity. She becomes a professor of Japanese literature, no relation to me, of course, and she fails to get tenure, and she fails in her marriage. And so she sort of limps back to Kyoto, a broken person, and becomes a translator in a firm that translates business documents, computer manuals, that sort of thing. And it's really beneath her talent, but she likes the calm and the certainty of the mundane that she has there. And then one day, this woman appears on her doorstep and asks her to translate a novel. And the novel is by a writer who we assume, we don't know, people assumed he had died 20 years ago. He had not been heard from for years. And so Ruth is perplexed, where did this novel come from? But she wants to do it because of the literary challenge. And as she's translating, she comes across a scene of a body lying alongside a river covered in tattoos. And it seems that the owner of the body, the person who's dead, is the sister of this writer. And they were from a family that was in a long tradition of kimono designers, kimono makers. And so the woman is covered in a tattoo that resembles kimono design. And Ruth is perplexed and shocked and wonders, what kind of fiction this is, until the next day she sees on television a body was discovered in the exact same place. So she begins to grow concerned if she has evidence of a murder. Is this a crime? She doesn't know what's going on. And she has to use her knowledge of Japanese culture and Japanese kimono and translation to help her try to unravel this mystery. And as she does, it brings her closer to her own sort of family wounds and secrets.
Yeah, and something you'll never see coming at the end. So can you read a little bit from the book?
So I guess I'll start with the opening, just the opening of the first chapter. So here we go. Chapter 1, Pigeons. The white parasol caught my eye. I watched the tip gliding along the green hedge, running parallel to the parking lot outside my window. Fair complexions were prized in Japan, and particularly in Kyoto, where many claimed the traditional values and tastes were stronger. Most women carried parasols when the sun was bright, shielding themselves from the skin-darkening rays. Many carried them even when the sun was dim and long into the autumn months. I recalled the way neighborhood women approached me when I was a little girl out on errands with my mother. They would stroke my porcelain skin, murmuring, "Kime ga komakai." Her pores are so fine. I thought I was close to royalty until the summer I was 13 and my parents returned to North Carolina on furlough. All the girls in that lazy town slathered up with baby oil and baked under the sun. They admired their tawny brown tans and the white lines left by their skimpy bathing suits. Next to them, my skin was practically luminescent. "Here comes Casper," they smirked whenever they saw me. Tired of the taunts, I spent an afternoon on a lawn chair under the sun until I turned crimson. My mother rushed me to the emergency room for third-degree burns. Far less painful to be a fine-pored princess in Japan. I watched the white tip until it reached the corner and turned down my street. A woman in a gray kimono stepped into view. Even from a distance, I could tell the fabric was a kinsha silk. At the hem ran an asymmetrical design in gradated shades of blue and pale pink, resembling a mountain ridge, a flowing stream, a spring haze. The woman seemed very chic, her face carefully shaded by her parasol. I gauged from the color of her kimono, she was in her 60s, She walked with assurance, her black sandals clipping silently over the pavement. With each step, her kimono snapped open at the hem, revealing the white under kimono. She held her parasol aloft with her right hand, and in her left, she carried a shopping bag from the Takashimaya department store. I wanted to catch a glimpse of her face, but a flock of pigeons took flight from outside my window, blocking my view. When the fluttering of wings subsided, the woman stepped beyond my field of vision. So that's that. Thank you.
All right, well, this leads me perfectly to this next question. As a translator, we have you've translated other people's stuff into words on the paper.
Mhm.
So we recently got Teresa Bakken to do our audio book. I'm going to pull you in a little bit, Teresa. We're so happy to have her. When I heard her, I was like, okay, that's the voice of Ruth right there. How does it feel to have somebody else translate your words into audio?
Oh my goodness, I know. I have to say I'm a little embarrassed to be reading in front of Teresa, because when I heard her read this, I'm like, oh, that's how it should be read. I mean, you picked such a wonderful narrator, Melissa. I'm just delighted. And in fact, I've heard one of the chapters that Teresa has narrated, and the way she entered into the words and really understood them, even I felt at times better than myself. I understood that's what a translator is. And authors, as we all know, we write from inspiration at times, and we don't always know what we have until somebody really activates it through reading. And I kind of felt like that's what Teresa has done. And I'm just very grateful.
Yeah, sometimes when I write, somebody will say, oh, I loved it when you did this. I'm like, yeah, I did that. I meant to do that. So Teresa, we think you are awesome, and I cannot wait for the audiobook to come out. I'm super excited.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Those were such kind words, Rebecca. You just that kind of took my breath away. That's certainly music to my ears to hear how pleased you are with it.
Teresa, didn't you go to Kyoto too?
Yes, I do have a connection. And I think this is so interesting how the narrator and the author come together, sometimes in such a serendipitous way. But yes, this story, when I read it, really spoke to me, because like you just said about how the city is part of the story, is a character in it. I think Rebecca's writing has so much imagery. It's so immersive that it really spoke to me, and I have been there. And so I can testify that she captured that so beautifully. So it's fun. It's so fun to narrate a story where you feel the author takes you somewhere. It's a privilege.
Thank you so much. And I have to say, I want to go back, right? And we can't, we can't travel. And so for me, writing about Kyoto was a way of taking myself there.
Yes, that's an excellent point about why I think reading and books and audiobooks have just soared through this pandemic, because I think everyone is looking for a way to travel, and books give us that in so many ways, right?
Yes, absolutely. All right, well, thank you, Teresa. I'm sorry I pulled you in without.
No. Privileged, happy to contribute. Thank you.
So I heard you say why you wrote the Kimono Tattoo. What made you decide, okay, I have to write this story, because you had been writing nonfiction?
Yeah.
So what pulled you into the fiction area?
So I love mystery fiction, and when I saw what Sujata Masi had done with her series of mysteries, and also there's a writer who lives in St. Louis named Joe Xiaolong, and he writes about China, a mystery novel set in China. I just and he writes in English. I just felt this is another way to sort of introduce Kyoto to people and introduce Japan to people. And I just started with inspiration and very little else. You know, I wanted to write about a translator because that allows this sort of opportunity to bring different texts, different voices in to commingle with the narrator, with the narration. And I liked the idea of what happens in the translation sort of slipping off the page and entering the reality of the translator.
Yeah.
Well, that would be spooky. And then the kimono just sort of crept into the story. I hadn't intended that, but because it's set in Kyoto, I thought it needed to have this sort of anchor to tradition. And I love kimono, so that just happened. And I think I expressed to you at some point earlier that I'm kind of a pantser when it comes to writing. I just started writing and saw where it led me.
Well, I'm glad you did. Okay, so touching on kimonos, after I read this book, I'm like, I have to have a kimono.
Yeah.
I'm so tired of my American muumuu. I need a fancy Kyoto kimono. So we were talking the other day about kimonos and their meaning.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm interested to find out the kimonos, how they show class, and a little bit about the person that wears it.
Right. So, you know, another interesting thing about Kyoto is you will see people in kimono in Kyoto much more frequently than in other cities. Again, and this sort of ties to that traditional angle. And in fact, more recently, from the mid 2000s, they have created a campaign in Kyoto to encourage people to wear kimono. So if you come to Kyoto and you're a tourist, you can go to a kimono rental office and they will dress you in kimono and you can wear it all day. And then you get discounts when you take a taxi or ride a bus or go to a museum if you're wearing kimono.
That's so cool.
And the reason is that, and they dress you, you know, they put it on you so you don't have to worry about figuring it out. But the reason is kimono have been growing less and less popular, and women are finding it more and more difficult to know how to put it on. And so because they're afraid they're not going to follow the rules correctly, they don't wear kimono. Or if they do, they have to go to the beauty parlor to get dressed. So it just becomes much more complicated. But in the old days, everybody wore kimono. When we think of kimono as sort of associated with women, but in the old days, men wore kimono, women wore kimono. Oh. You wore kimono according to the season. So there were certain seasonal styles, like layered kimono you would wear in the winter, single layer kimono in the summer. And so they were tied to the seasons, and they were also tied to class. If you were of a certain class, you could wear more elaborate materials. If you're the lower class, you couldn't. What was interesting in the 17th century in Japan is the lower class that were merchants, and they had the money, and the upper class were the samurai, and they often were impoverished. But because of these rules that you couldn't wear elaborate kimono if you were lower class, the merchants would put their silks and their beautiful dyes and everything on the inside of the kimono and wear it close to them. So they knew they were fancy, but the rest of the society was none the wiser. So I just sort of like the way kimono has all these different layers and stories, and I was trying to capture some of that.
Well, speaking of layers and stories, one of the girl that gets killed, I hope I'm not giving anything away, she has the kimono tattooed on her body. So as we were talking the other day, tattoos are really a kind of taboo in Japan, which I was kind of shocked at. So tell us why this, and she came from a prominent family, right? why someone would have a tattoo all over her body when it's kind of frowned upon.
Oh, yes. I mean, the narrator, Ruth, is just shocked because most proper women would never have a tattoo. Very unblemished skin is prized. And to mark your skin would be shocking. There's a number of reasons why tattoos are taboo, but this woman, her name is Satoko, and she's the sister of the author of the novel that Ruth is translating. And the author was in line to become the heir to the Kimono family. And he didn't want anything to do with it. He wanted to be a writer. So that's why he disappeared. And he was disinherited. And his sister, Satoko, was very accomplished with kimono dyeing and kimono designing. And she really wanted to assume the headship of the family, but her father forbade it because of old-fashioned notions of women not being in leadership positions. And so he had her married to another man who then became the leader of the family business. And he was an awful man. And I think in sort of protest to that, Satoko has her skin dyed with the motifs of the kimono, and in a particular kimono that was owned by the family is the motif that she has dyed into her skin. So it's a rebellion, but of course nobody else knows because it's hidden. Only
but the husband knows.
Yes.
But the husband knows. And
yeah.
It's interesting as to why she did that and let her husband know. And we won't give anything away. So every time that we talk about this online, tattoos come up, and there's just like this whirlwind of tattoo conversation and everything. So do you have any tattoos?
I don't. I think if I were 30 years younger, I might, but again, because of my connection with Japan, if I had a tattoo, it would limit my ability to go places. For example, going to a hot spring resort is very popular. It's a popular vacation in Japan to go to a hot spring and take a bath in the hot spring. And people bathe publicly with others. I mean, it's usually sexes are divided, so it's women and women. But if I had a tattoo, I would not be allowed to bathe with others, for example, and it would just shut doors for me. So I resisted.
That's so crazy. Okay, what about how do you feel about being a white woman writing as Japanese characters? Was that hard for you?
This was something I really had to think about. And I made reference to Sujata Massey, and she's Asian American, South Asian, and her character is Japanese American. And, I didn't think I could do that. So my character is more of a reflection of my experience in Japan. And having lived in Japan for off and on as I have, I'm familiar with Japanese culture, but I don't feel like I should be the representative necessarily of a Japanese voice. So my Japanese characters, the main characters are women who have also had international experience. And Ruth's sidekick is named Maho, and Maho is kind of the opposite of Ruth. Maho grew up in America, and when she goes back to Japan, she feels out of place, whereas Ruth feels comfortable in Japan and out of place in America. So
she's one of my favorite characters too.
Maho, everybody loves Maho. Yeah. She has a mohawk, she has tattoos, she has piercings, she's very shocking, but very sweet and sincere character who Ruth couldn't survive really without Maho.
Yeah. Did you have this outlined, or are you the pantser as you write as they come to you?
Yeah, so somebody brilliantly gave me the suggestion that I should discover my characters first. And so I didn't have an outline per se, but I created stories for each character, and I created their backstories. And Melissa, as you know, I had a lot. I had a lot in that novel that you had, you wisely told me, you better take some of that out. But anyway, so I had all this backstories for each character, and then I put the characters together, and it just happened. So I'm a runner, and I know that a lot of writers are runners, and they get inspired as they run. So when I was writing, I ran a lot, and as I was running, my characters would start talking in my head, and then I have to go home quickly and write it down. And so that's how it came about. And I'm afraid it probably shows a little bit in the construction of the novel. I think in the future, I'll try to be more of an outliner.
Well, no, that's not. Some people do, some people don't.
Yeah.
What character surprised you the most of what they did?
Oh my goodness. Well, the evil person, that person was just so awful. And yet I've encountered people that have held grudges. This person holds a grudge, and that's what motivates many of the crimes that occur. And she would just pop up and do these awful things, and she surprised me.
Yeah. Did you know the ending before it happened?
Mm-mm.
So
I had several endings.
I'm sure that surprised you too, the ending.
Yes.
Huh?
Yes.
It surprised me
Dot.
too. And Kathy, I'm sorry, but I don't have my glasses on, so I can't see chat. So if there's any questions, please just pop in and ask. I'm going to have her read a little bit more of the Kimono Tattoo.
Oh, okay. So when I was working with Melissa on marketing the book, she told me I needed a tagline, and I'm a newbie, so I wasn't sure what a tagline was, and I had to kind of Google it and understood that I needed to come up with a line that would incorporate the gist of the novel, but also sound appealing. And with the help of my sister and friends and Melissa, I eventually landed on one that Mandy has put in the chat. Silk unravels, a tattoo is forever. Layer by layer, the truth is revealed. So like a kimono, everything in the novel is layered. The storyline, the imagery, the narrative structure, and of course the characters. And I've already told you a little bit about Ruth and how she grew up in Kyoto and is sort of searching for her identity, trying to find out where she belongs. And so this excerpt that I'm going to read, I think encapsulates this sort of sense of identity and presence of layers. So here, Ruth is on her way to meet her friend Maho, and she passes by one of Kyoto's most venerable sites, the Nanzen Temple, which was founded in the 13th century, but the buildings that still stand date from the 17th century. So here's the scene. The Nanzen Temple grounds were nearly empty as I cut across them, except for a man feeding pigeons by Sanmon Gate. People love Kyoto because of its rich history. Almost any point in the city will yield a story about an event that happened there in the 8th century, in a later event in the 11th century, and so on. History wraps the city in layers. The waves of history undulate and overlap, allowing us to go backwards in time, even as we go forward. And my history was there too. My stories also settling into the sediment. Whenever I saw the great Sanmon at Nanzen Temple, I remembered the way my little brother and I used to play there on occasion. We would wrap our arms around the pillars of the gate and try to touch each other's hands. Our arms were too short, but each year we seemed to get closer and closer. The pillars were lighter in color near the base from all the hands that patted and rubbed the wood in passing. My brother's handprints were there, and mine too, pressed into the history of the temple, becoming part of the story. So that's that scene.
Beautiful.
Awesome. See, it just takes you there. Just takes you there. Another question I'd like to ask you is, what kind of reactions are you getting from readers and your students? Like, maybe, I mean, I know that there's been an Australian review of your book from the translator. Remember that? And it's crazy how it's going around internationally. So what kind of reactions are you getting?
Well, the people are remarking on what you've said, that they like being transported to Kyoto, and a lot of people have already experienced living in Kyoto and say, oh, that really took me back, and it made me remember these happy times. And I think, you know, other people, I mean, the less happy comments are, some people think maybe there's too much going on, or that there's a competition between plot lines. And so that was one of the challenges that I had, is in creating layers, it is complex. So not everybody likes that, I think.
It's a smart read. It's not a fluff piece. It is a smart read. And when you read it, you want to discuss it with some people, because there's so much to talk about and so much that other people see that you don't. So I think that's perfect. What about your students, though? What do they have to say?
Well,
is it required reading?
No, I last semester I taught mystery fiction, Japanese mystery fiction, and I very coyly suggested that students might want to read my book, but I feel uncomfortable requiring it, you know, so not yet.
But has anyone read it?
Favor, they will read it, I'm sure.
Well, has anybody read it and come up to you and
no.
said?
Some students, some of my graduate students bought it and had me sign it for them.
Yeah.
I was very touched by that.
So now that you've written fiction, what do you think the best thing about being a writer is?
Well, for me, writing fiction was the challenge. And I mean, I don't know if this is a fair comparison, but it makes academic writing seem easy. I mean, I was very comfortable with academic writing and I knew how to get published, but writing fiction, it's just a brave new world. And I like the challenge of trying to understand that world. So I'm writing about a world removed from the United States, but for me, writing fiction took me into an entirely different world beyond my comfort zone too. So I liked that challenge.
So where are you now? You're in the United States.
Yes.
Where are you?
I'm right now, I'm in North Carolina. So I have family connections with North Carolina, and my career is in St. Louis. So tomorrow I have to drive back.
What?
I know.
Oh, well, what about, what's the hardest thing you find about writing?
Well, discipline. You know, I think finding the time for, I'm so impressed with so many of you writers who carve out space and sit yourself down and do your writing. And for me, I'm not there yet. When I'm in academic mode, it's really hard for me to turn that off and open up the space where I can go and be creative. And so that's why the Kimono Tattoo took so long, because I really felt I could only write in the summer when I was released from some of the obligations of the university. And so I just sort of hang on, you know, next summer, I'll be able to write some more. And So that for me, that's the hardest part is disciplining myself.
So what's next, fiction or nonfiction?
Oh, there's there's a follow-up to the Kimono Tattoo.
Yay!
Yeah. It's called The Blood Brocade, and it's also set in Kyoto. But my, if I can stick with it, I want to send Ruth to other parts of Japan where she will translate other things and get into other adventures, and sadly other people will die. But I want to send her around Japan. But the next one is still set in Kyoto.
She's a great character. I'd follow her anywhere she went.
Okay.
Sold.
Thank
I have
you.
a question. Where did you get Blood Brocade? What a provocative title.
Right. So the next one is about the weaving of brocade. And one thing I realize in the traditional arts, they're so beautiful. And I don't think this is limited to Japan, but the artisans are often exploited for
Yes.
their art, for their talents. And the people who then enjoy the art have really no recognition of the suffering that went into making this beautiful product. So blood brocade refers to the fact that the weavers of this fabric often were very downtrodden and suffered. So that kind of also suggests this layering of the beautiful front side, but underneath there's something darker.
Wow, that's beautiful.
I gotta write it.
I'll be behind you, nagging you.
Okay, good. But thank you.
Kathy, was there any other questions that we had?
Well, let's open it up. Let's see if anybody has any questions. You raise your hand. So anything you want to, anybody want to respond to or comment about or ask about?
I have a question.
Okay.
Hi,
who is it?
Rebecca. Hi,
Hi.
Melissa.
Oh,
I'm Kathleen.
Okay.
Hi, Kathleen.
You talked earlier about the tattoos on the skin are a taboo. Now, I've never been to Japan. I have two grown sons. Many of their friends, one's in the army, one's an artist. They all have tats, and it's just part of their generation.
That's right.
What happens when, say, young men or women in their 30s travel to those locations as tourists, and they've got full sleeves, and
Yep.
some people have neck,
I know. Yes. I had a graduate student who was in Japan doing his research, and he has full sleeves, he has the neck, it's even coming on his hands. And he would wear long sleeves when he was outside, but Japan is so hot in the summer, so he would have to wear t-shirts, and the police would stop him and taking him in for questioning because they assumed he was part of a mafia, a gang, or a drug seller or something. So it was inconvenient. Now, in 2020, Japan prepared for the Olympics. And as you noted, most young people have tattoos. So yes, many of our Olympic athletes have tattoos. So there was a lot of concern over what's going to happen when these athletes start walking around in Japan with their tattoos. And because of the pandemic, the athletes didn't mingle as much in Japan. So I'm not sure that it was quite the problem that people were suspecting, but it is changing. And when I first started to go to Japan in the 70s, women wouldn't even have pierced ears. The changing of your body was thought of as sort of a crime against your parents to damage the body that they gave you. And so women wouldn't even pierce their ears. And now they do. Now you have women with lots of piercings. So I think tattooing will change too.
Very good.
I have a comment or question.
Sandra? Okay.
I don't know if you have read The Garden of Evening Mist. Garden of Evening Mist.
Oh, I've heard about it, Wanda, but I haven't read it yet. I need to read that.
Yes, it talks about tattoo quite a bit.
Yes.
And in the
Oh, I lost your.
Yeah, we've lost
Audio.
you.
And the major
There she
character.
is.
Can you hear me?
Yes,
Okay.
now.
Yeah, you just cut out for a
yeah.
minute. Okay.
Okay. My internet connection is so unstable, so I'm really worried about our next session.
Oh.
But anyway, one of the main characters is a gardener who used to be a gardener for imperial, the family at the palace, and he moved to Malaysia, and he lives in the hill, in the mountain, and he creates this beautiful, beautiful garden. And two sisters, one was raped and killed by the Japanese. Japan occupied a big portion of Asia. And this woman suffered, the main character suffered torture. And anyway, after the World War, she comes back and she investigates a World War II Japanese crime. And she's a judge. And she retired from that, and she goes to this area. She wanted to recreate a garden just like they were used to seeing this Japanese gardener created. Mm-hmm. So she meets him, and they become lovers, even though they are enemies. Their countries are enemies. And he tattoos her back. And that's an art form in Japan. And I read somewhere that they actually sell the skin, the tattooed skin in Japan, because it's art. So that's another side of it. So listening to you, I feel like there might be two classes, like
oh yeah,
geishas. The upper level geishas are very sophisticated, educated, talented, trained for many, many years before they become geishas of that class. And then on the other hand, there's a country geisha, much lower class. They become geishas because of the need, and they're basically prostitutes. So maybe listening to you that it's not accepted in Japan, there might be different type of tattooing going on there. One for the sake of art, and the other in Korea. I'm from Korea. Usually the people who have tattoos on the arms and things, they were looked down. I don't think it's like that anymore. So, Japan and Korea share a lot of things that are many different things, but they share a lot of cultural behaviors. So, it's interesting that you talk about tattoo, and that is a big portion of your novel.
I'd have to read that. I'll need to read that novel. In Japan has had a long history of tattooing, and when we look at prehistoric artifacts, we can see that people were tattooed in these artifacts. And at some point, though, tattooing was sort of taken over by the punitive government and was used as a marker of criminality. So if a person was arrested and convicted of a crime, they would have a tattoo put on their face or put on their hands or something to mark them as disreputable or impure. And so there's that level of the tattoo. The geisha, what's interesting is in the licensed quarters, women were forced to have many lovers, and if they fell in love with a man, it was very hard for them to prove their love to that man because they were forced to take on other lovers. So they would enter a pact with him and perhaps would have their body tattooed to show their affection, to show their affinity. Other ways that they could express this would be to cut off a lock of their hair, pull out their fingernails, cut off a finger. Fingers don't grow back. So, and tattoos are forever. So these would have been very deep kind of marks of affection. And then the ultimate, of course, would be to commit love suicide with the man, since they couldn't be together. So, and now you have the West, America and Europe, sort of bringing Japanese style tattooing into the foreground. And so I think the attitudes towards tattooing will change because they have over the years, over the centuries, attitudes towards tattooing in Japan have changed, and of course in the United States as well.
Well, let's tell everybody where we can get the book.
Brother Mockingbird.
Yay, Brother
webpage.
Mockingbird.
It is available, the IndieBound bookshop.org, which I love to send people to.
Mhm.
Amazon, Barnes and Noble. The audiobook will be out sometime March, April, we're not sure. And basically anywhere you can buy a book online, and there's a lot of bookstores carrying it, and if not, request it, and it is available.
Right.
Thank you. Thank you so much for all these questions, and appreciate the time to talk about what I obviously enjoy.
Oh my goodness. Well, thank you so much, Melissa and
Thank you.
Rebecca and Teresa. We all look so forward to everybody sharing and discussing this book, all our readers. It's quite a process, and we're going around the world with books, everybody. So thank you so much. And we've got to hurry because we got another session coming up. Okay.
Thank
Bye,
you.
everybody. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you. And jump on board in just a few.
We will. Thank you.